That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about House of Gucci, which United Artists Releasing is opening on November 24th, 2021, just in time for Thanksgiving. It is, I think, the 27th film directed by Ridley Scott. The second one that's coming out this year, hot on the heels of The Last Duel, which also starred Adam Driver. And here we are. It's based on Sara Gay Forden's book, which she was a fashion journalist that spent years putting together this kind of what sounds like a rich story about the Gucci, the rise and fall of the Gucci empire.
What's your favorite Thanksgiving side?
I have no.
You make like a corn dish.
I do make a corn dish, yeah.
Like a corn cheddar. Mm-hmm. It's like sweet corn bread, like sweet corn cheddar bread.
Mm-hmm. It's very good. Not good for you. Like this film. Oh no, this film.
Not as good as this movie. Yeah. Yeah, I feel conflicted. Well, so Ridley Scott directed one of your favorite films of all time.
A couple. Well, between Alien and Blade Runner, which were second and third films, yeah, and consistently, his output. He's at the level now of like Clint Eastwood, where it's like maybe you're working too fast for your age, or why are you telling this story?
My question for this movie is, why is he telling this story, and why is no one speaking Italian?
Well, in The Last Duel as well, it's set in medieval France and nobody's speaking French, but I think, and wisely, nobody opted to do accents in that film, which I think allowed us to kind of be transposed into that environment.
This review is going to be long, I feel, because I was so... Seeing the imagery from the film, like shots from the location of the filming of this movie, like earlier this year, I think the reaction on social media, and certainly my own, was that this is going to be a hot mess express, but it'll probably be like campy fun.
Or, you know, I did like his All the Money in the World, the film he had to infamously reshoot with Christopher Plummer at the last minute about
because of Kevin Spacey.
Yeah, about the Getty kidnapping. And that film, I think, especially for later period, Ridley Scott works quite well. So that's kind of what I was hoping for, and maybe with a little camp or kitsch.
Yeah, this wasn't a good movie or like a campy fun movie. For many reasons, but I should start with the basic story. So we start the story in 1978.
Milan.
And at that time, Gucci, which is the luxury brand most of us know, was owned by two brothers, Rodolfo and Aldo. Rodolfo's played by Jeremy Irons and Aldo's played by Al Pacino. Mm-hmm. Rodolfo has a son, Maurizio, played by Adam Driver, and Aldo has a son, Paolo, played by Jared Leto.
Leto, I believe it's
Leto. Okay. Maurizio is at a really fancy like socialite party event one day when a woman named Patrizia is there. And Patrizia is played by Lady Gaga. She's the daughter of a dump truck owner. Like her dad owns like a fleet of dump trucks and seems to have done well for himself, and she works for her dad like in his office. All right, so she is at this party with her gay best friend when she meets Maurizio and mistakes him for the bartender. And they kind of have an awkward exchange, and then until Maurizio introduces himself to her as Maurizio Gucci, and her eyes light up like she hit the jackpot. So we get a little montage of her, a segment of her trying to like place herself in front of him because they have a great night at that party, but at like midnight he's like, all right, gotta go have a nice life. So she figures out like where he is, asks him to ask her on a date. He does. Then we get like a 5-minute montage of their courtship and them falling madly in love, to the point where Maurizio introduces Patrizia to his dad and then says, I'm going to marry her. And the dad is like, listen, you can have sex with this lady, take her shopping, take her on trips, but you are not marrying her. Because basically she's a peasant compared to this dynasty. That's how he treats her.
A plebeian, yeah.
Yeah. And Maurizio says, no, I'm going to be happy. I'm not going to make the same mistakes you did, which we'll get into because that doesn't make sense to me. So we cut to Maurizio having packed up his luggage and taken a cab to Patrizia's parents' house, where he says, I don't have a job, I don't have any money, but I love your daughter and I want to marry her. Then we cut to Maurizio washing dump trucks. He is happy with Patrizia. She gets pregnant. They get married. They seem to have a very nice life together. When one day Aldo, Maurizio's uncle, Al Pacino, half owner of Gucci, says, sorry I couldn't make it to your wedding. Come to my 70th birthday. This is in Italy. Like, you know, we're still in Italy. It's in some fancy villa.
But he's inviting them to come to New York. Basically, he wants to take...
Well, no, before they go to New York, they go to the 70th birthday party,
yes.
and that's when we see Patrizia, like, the wheels are turning, like, oh, I'm about to be rich. Like, I'm going to get my husband back into the Gucci empire, and I'm going to be that bitch. So she does. She starts talking to Aldo privately, like, Maurizio really wants to be part of the family. He needs your help. They fly to New York. She sort of, like, wiggles Maurizio's way into a job with Aldo, and then everything sort of takes off from there, because then there's this, it sounds more interesting than it actually plays out, but there are these interplays between the family members like Rodolfo, Aldo, Paolo, and Maurizio, where they sort of trick Paolo into giving information that gets Aldo thrown in prison for tax evasion, which also ends up in Paolo selling his shares. Rodolfo dies, so Maurizio gets half ownership of Gucci, and that's when things change. It seems like suddenly Maurizio is just not feeling Patrizia. Like, he's become sort of like power hungry and not a nice man, and obviously Patrizia loves being rich, but he dumps her. He says, like, you and our daughter need to go back to Milan. I'm gonna live my life out with some other lady.
Paola, played by Camille Cottin.
Patrizia can't take it, so she basically does a murder for hire. Maurizio gets killed, and Patrizia is found guilty of killing him. A big part I didn't mention is when they first get married and they have their humble life together. One day, Patrizia is in the kitchen eating what looks like Haagen-Dazs or Ben & Jerry's, which couldn't be right because it's 1980, whatever.
She has 3 cartons of something.
She has 3 cartons of something that looks like Ben & Jerry's, and she's just watching TV when a commercial for like a psychic hotline comes on. Like, call me now, Miss Cleo. But it's a psychic named Pina, played by Salma Hayek. Mm-hmm. Patrizia calls that number, and it's like a live televised reading. And Pina tells her some things that really resonate with her. And then throughout the film, we see that Pina and Patrizia have, Pina's her like confidant, mm-hmm. and is advising her on how to proceed with her life. And they're casting spells on, which we never see. They just say that they did, so it's not that interesting. But at a point, Patricia's like, this shit is not working. These spells aren't working. And then Pina says we need to do something more severe, and that's when Pina gets the guys who ultimately kill Maurizio for hire. Wow. We were so disappointed, and then you knew it was based on a book, so immediately afterwards you looked up.
I wish I'd had the foresight to read the book, because from what I understand, it really goes in depth. Forden goes into depth behind the scenes at the trial, and like kind of all the juicy tidbits, the connective tissue that isn't really here. It's like this script from Becky Johnston, who wrote the Prince of Tides screenplay and Under the Cherry Moon, and Roberto Bentavegna. It's like they can't quite pick who to focus on, and I don't know if that's because how casting ultimately played out and they decided to divert focus potentially.
Yeah.
But there are so many elements at play, and they dropped the ball on all of them, because I don't really get a sense of who Patrizia is, or especially Maurizio. And I think the casting of Gaga and Adam Driver kind of throws off both of these characterizations. I think the script and the dialogue is almost across the board on the nose and
well, we need to break
terrible.
It down.
Okay.
So all the things that don't work. First, you said when you were describing the book, and the most interesting pieces of the story are missing from this movie. So the trial, because we see that Patrizia hires these people to kill her husband. They do it. And then we are told 2 years passes when we see her in front of a magistrate. And then we're just getting like subtitles saying that she was sentenced to 26 years in prison. But it's like, what happened in those 2 years?
Before she got
caught. Like, was she running Gucci? Was she like spending money Like, we don't know anything about that. Then we don't know anything about the trial. We just see the magistrate saying her name multiple times and she doesn't respond. And then she finally responds by saying like, call me Miss Gucci or whatever. And then that's the end. But it's like, what was that fucking trial like? Then you see Salma Hayek looking crazy as hell, wearing this god-awful red wig with her two little henchmen. And it's like, that's the most interesting part of this. We get nothing. Then I think another really interesting part that we don't really see is the decadence and the lifestyle of these people. Like, this movie does not feel opulent. It doesn't feel expensive.
Correct. Yeah.
And Gucci is known for the colors, like the green with the red and we don't have that color palette in this movie. Mm-hmm. It's very drab.
No, and it was shot by Darius Wolski, who Scott often works with. And there are a lot of kind of up-close tight frames instead. But you don't even really get the interiors that much of the houses, which is interesting. But yes, I think all of those connective issues are lacking so that you don't really know how to feel about any certain one of them. So you're kind of left to the performers depending on themselves. And I think Lady Gaga is doing what she can with this role, like probably overdoing it, but none of the dialogue is any good. I also found her very distracting, and makeup and wardrobe do her a disservice in this, because I don't think at any point does she seems like she's from the Jersey Shore.
Okay, talking about casting then.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about.
Right, so go ahead.
And the dialogue they give her, the scene where I honestly think she looks the best is at that ski resort, and she confronts Camille Cottin, who she knows is her husband hasn't slept with her, Will. Just the dialogue is so on the nose, it can't even have any sense of menace. Or she's supposed to be this manipulative narcissist kind of, but she's never presented in a way that's smart enough to do so, or that she's actually learned how to kind of manipulate this world or these people in it.
Well, yeah, okay, so yes. So then talking specifically about Patrizia, I feel like Lady Gaga, my first note is the script goes, we hear characters refer to her as Elizabeth Taylor, like she's so beautiful. And I know people love Lady Gaga. I'm not a big Lady Gaga fan, so I'm not hating on her. Like, this lady is not Elizabeth Taylor. Like, Lady Gaga is not Elizabeth Taylor. So the fact that these characters are referring to her like she's so beautiful and captivating is kind of distracting. And I was looking at pictures of the real Patrizia, and that lady is like a Sophia Loren looking woman who looks like she's like a Spitfire, like has something to her. But Lady Gaga's Patrizia just feels like you said, like some girl from the Jersey Shore in the 80s.
Well, yeah, and what we talked probably ad nauseum at home about this film already, but what would have really worked is if they had found like a young Anna Magnani type.
Yes. Someone,
if that person exists even. But
someone with intensity and fire who I could believe would like strong arm a man.
Yeah, I think Gaga's performance is very monotonous, and same goes for Adam Driver, who I think, as Maurizio is supposed to be this weak, henpecked kind of man that kind of wakes up from under the spell of his wife, perhaps. But as portrayed by Adam Driver, I never believed that about him.
No, he seems very confident and assured.
Yes.
So there's no arc. So that's why I was saying it feels like he just switches at a point to not liking his wife, and then he says, well, finally I can do what I want to do. But we get the sense that you've always been able to do what you want to do. That brings me to, well, going back to the casting, I think, okay, so then Al Pacino. I think Al Pacino and Jared Leto fare the best, but only in the sense that it's kind of comical. I would actually say this movie is kind of like, they're both clowns, particularly Jared Leto, but Al Pacino, he has a scene where he does that shouting that he's known for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think every scene with Al Pacino and Jared Leto are over the top.
Like Grey Gardens you had mentioned.
It feels like Grey Gardens because Al Pacino gets sent to prison for tax fraud. And then when he returns, Paolo is already a wreck. Paolo has sold or agreed to sell his shares because he has no money. So he's living in like squalor. So when they both go back, Al Pacino stomping through his house like it's messy. He puts on an apron, starts doing dishes. And then when he finds out that Paolo has agreed to sell his share of Gucci, he has like an outburst. Like, that shit was so awkward. And then why did we need Jared Leto in a fat costume with prosthetics and a bald head?
And, okay, so everybody's accent in this film is all over the place. Jared Leto does the best job with this.
I agree.
This terrible idea to have all these Italians in Italy, and it's hard to tell when they're in Italy or New York even when they say it, but that's frustrating to me. But you might as well hand him a watermelon in this film because he looks like Gallagher.
That's right, he does look like Gallagher.
It's so distracting, and the dialogue also that he has to give. There's one scene where he's like, never mistake shit for chocolate because believe me, I've done that or something. It's so dumb, and every scene it's comical. Even from the moment where we see him for the first time playing football and he falls down and injures himself, he's like ba ba, and it draws laughs from the audience. And every time he's on scene, it draws laughs. And I was confused about where the turning point where Patrizia kind of singles him out and manipulates him. There's we see a newspaper clipping and how he was causing trouble for the Guccis. And I went back to read more about what that was all about. And it turns out that Paolo was actually designer at Gucci, was the vice president. And what tripped him up is he started kind of a secret line using the Gucci name of his own designs, which is why they sued him. And then, but they paint him as such a clown.
Yes. That's a really good point because I think that also could have been a really interesting angle for this movie is focus on Paolo because they make Paolo in this movie seem like a literal clown with like who's completely incompetent. We hear his dad refer to him as an idiot, but he's my idiot. But in reality, Paolo Gucci was a head designer. He was the VP of something, and then he started his own line. So like, I just don't understand the choices that were made, and I think maybe it is what you said, like, they were able to cast Lady Gaga, and maybe they thought that if they focused the story more on Patrizia, that might have more traction, but...
Well, and then, you have Jared Leto in this character that you don't need him to play. Just hire a man that looks like... Hire
an Italian man...
that looks like that.
I don't know that Jared Leto's not of Italian descent, but it's just like...
Hire somebody that looks like that, and then... It's like they felt forced, like, well, we have to give him a lot of screen time now. And to me, this reads very much like a Ryan Murphy, or back in the 70s, if this had been made in the 70s, a Harold Robbins production of just over-the-top excess that's just silly.
Well, speaking of Ryan Murphy, I think if a person's interested in watching like a story about a fashion designer being killed, I think Ryan Murphy's The Assassination of Gianni Versace is really good. I've watched that series like 3 times now. And
again, though, what that does is it gives us the main players, which usually are the most distracting, like Penelope Cruz, Donatella, and then it takes the poetic license it does is it invigorates these supporting players or the villains. And that film does not do this. There's no kind of license taken in giving Patrizia a personality even beyond stereotypes, and that's really what it needed to do.
I also found the soundtrack in this film very distracting because there are some pretty big songs in this movie which are quite fabulous, and I think that the musical selections in this film are more fabulous than the damn film.
Yeah, when I hear I Feel Love, I Want to Feel I Feel Love. It doesn't, or what is it, Heart of Glass?
Or the Eurythmics, Here Comes the Rain Again. I mean, there are some really good songs in this film, and it's during a scene where it doesn't even necessarily match, and then nothing about this movie feels like luxe 80s life, like luxury. So I just feel like that music was so wasted on this.
That is often, and so are some of the other details that they're using to drive a sense of characterization, like when Patrizia meets Rodolfo, Jeremy Irons, who I like Jeremy Irons, but there's one early cutaway where he's sitting alone in a scarf.
Yeah, wearing a long scarf.
It's like fluttering in the wind, and the audience was tittering because it's just ridiculous. And she meets him. She sees the interior of his house, and there's a very famous painting by Klimt, Lady in Gold or Woman in Gold, and she says, "Oh, I like your Picasso." And he's like, "Well, it's not Picasso." But that just threw me off, because if you're familiar with that, there's a movie made about how the Nazis, stole that from its Jewish owner, and the Austrian woman that sued the Austrian government to have it returned to her with Helen Mirren. So it's just like, it made me think, like, did the Gucci's have this paint? Like, why not use, I don't know. Just
related to that, there's a scene later in the film at the point where Maurizio and Patricia start to break apart, and it's when Maurizio is like staying at some cabin, like skiing, and then Patrizia shows up later. And when she shows up, Maurizio is like sitting with all of his friends who are all like rich, like he is, born rich. And then Patricia's old ghetto ass shows up, and she starts talking about like all the places she's been and the fancy things she's done. But at that point in their marriage, they've been together for years. So I just thought, like, this woman hasn't learned that, like, how to behave around people of this caliber, I suppose. It just felt very off, and like seemed like a choice. And I don't know, again, I haven't read the book either, but this characterization did not work for me. There's another scene where, so one thing that is mentioned quite a bit in this film is that Patrizia is not a Gucci, because she's trying to run things. But again, that sounds more interesting than how the film plays it out. It's just her trying to be manipulative, like behind the scenes, but it's telling us, it's not showing us. So there's a scene where she first sees like knockoff Gucci bags, like in like some garment district, and then she buys a bunch of them, brings them back to they're in New York.
At that point, yeah.
Yes. So they go back to the headquarters, and she's like enraged. Like, how can we let this happen? And that's when Aldo is like, y'all ain't shit, I'm Gucci, I decide what Gucci is, I don't give a damn what y'all think, the knockoffs are not a problem. And again, I just think this film does a terrible job of orienting people with the house of Gucci. Like, most of us know Gucci as a luxury accessory, but we don't know the story of Gucci.
Well, which is why
this film doesn't give it to us.
Which is why there are two occasions where Maurizio Gucci has to introduce himself, and people only, it's not like Versace, who people are familiar with as a face.
My last note revolves around, there's a plot point of when Tom Ford becomes head designer for Gucci, and that sort of like 10-minute sequence, because there's a fashion show attached to that, and then the success of the line is like lifetime level.
It's bad.
Cheesy.
There's Leto and Pacino are ultimately bought out by these Middle Eastern Investcorp, who was they had also saved Tiffany's kind of, and there's some really bad dialogue with them, and as they're trying to kind of also manipulate Maurizio as it comes down, but it results in Leto having a Nancy Kerrigan kind of meltdown scene.
Yeah.
As why, screaming why. Two other scenes I wanted to note. It's trying to do this Shakespearean tragedy where the house of Gucci is undone because they're like a greedy pack of backstabbers, and it's this woman that kind of is what takes them down.
Sure.
Ultimately. But the scene at the end where we get this truncated version of a trial, which we really need to see more of, where they're saying her name and she says, "You can call me Madame Gucci," feels very much like the George Cukor version of A Star Is Born, which Gaga was nominated for an Oscar in, where Judy Garland is triumphantly saying, "I'm Mrs. Norman Maine," and just the meaning of the name that she's married into, I think is interesting. Also, I think to me the best scene in the film is when Gaga makes that call and Salma Hayek is responding, the first interaction with the psychic.
Okay.
And you can hear her voice echoing on the TV, because it's almost like she's in a trance when she goes to pick up that phone and dial it. And I thought I wanted more of that kind of energy.
Yes, the Patrizia is portrayed as someone who really is invested in this psychic, in this confidant, but it plays out like a joke.
It does. And it also reminds that this was a mechanism that was used in that Snow White retelling that Isabelle Huppert was in, White as Snow, where the magic mirror is like psychic that tells her to kill Snow White or harm Snow White or whatever. And a lot of those scenes play out very similarly, like they're at the spa talking, that kind of stuff. Yeah, I don't know.
I think, go ahead.
Ridley Scott, when he's good, can be pretty good, but when he's bad, he's awful. And I think this is very much like The Counselor. I think Salma Hayek is kind of like Rosie Perez in that film, where he thinks like this is a light little bit of flavor I'm going to throw on top of all this other flavor that is just like this is a messy dish.
This movie is long. It's 2.5 hours.
My last note on it was it's just bloated. It feels entirely
It's bloated.
In one note.
I didn't care for it.
We didn't even get to talk about Jack Huston, who plays Domenico de Sol.
Who's very handsome.
Well, you know, he played an Olympian amongst racists in Antebellum. You've seen him in several times. Yes.
I don't recognize him from anything.
Oh, well, that was him in that.
Oh.
And he basically advises Rodolfo and then Maurizio.
That character and that was nothing to me. I mean, it's just this movie felt so flat to me. I don't care about these people. I didn't learn anything about these people or the House of Gucci. Like, for that reason, I would give this film 1.5. And I think that is just like I think within the 2.5 hours you will find some things that are amusing unintentionally. But by the 2-hour mark, I was ready to leave that theater. I was getting antsy by the 1-hour mark.
Those moments are very few and far between. I don't think there's any real payoff. It's as big a missed opportunity with casting as Exodus: Gods and Kings.
Oh God, this video's long. Anything else?
No.
Oh, what would you give it?
1. I thought it was extremely unpleasant.
Okay, bye.